Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? My only full trial. Contractor ripping off my client who was Nosen. I went through entire contract where each sub was listed and he agreed to each line as being part of contract. He agreed that amount was to be paid to the subs. He agreed to the total. What he failed to do was list any profit. My last question was, where is your profit in this contract? No answer from him. As written, he was working for free. Case dismissed by judge without me having to present my side. Most of mine are my own clients admitting the crime to police but not realizing it. So it's less gotcha and more time for a plea. Oh, I thought I was still driving in the parking lot when I put down my phone. Yeah, that's the charge too. There was no weapon. I'm the weapon. Welp. There's no way I was going. Speed, I was only going. Other speed well over the limit, etc. I represent tenants in eviction proceedings. Landlords being landlords. I have lots of gotcha stories. The most recent one was last week, in a classic he said, she said case. That is, the entire case depended upon whom the jury believed. When the landlord was sworn in prior to testifying, she unnecessarily said yes, on the Bible, when asked to tell the truth, the whole truth, etc. Her testimony, however, was evasive. She avoided answering almost every one of my questions. She even avoided answering some of her own lawyer's questions. During a recess, but still in the middle of her testimony, she was seen outside the courtroom, in full view of the jury, whispering with her lawyer and a family member about, obviously, what she was supposed to say on the stand. When she got back up, the first thing I did was ask her what she was talking about with her lawyer and her family member outside the courtroom. I demanded to know whether they were telling her how to answer my questions. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled the objection and ordered the witness to answer. The witness responded, "My life is my life." During closing arguments, her lawyer tried to argue that she must have been telling the truth because she swore on the Bible even though she didn't have to. That meant, according to him, that she took her oath more seriously than the average person. Impliedly, my client, who wouldn't bother swearing on a Bible when not asked to do so. In my response, I agreed with the landlord's counsel that his client must take her oath to tell the truth seriously. She must have taken it so seriously, in fact, that she refused to lie under oath when her truthful testimony would have sunk her case. So, instead, she just refused to answer almost every question put to her. The jury came back in about 30 minutes with a 12-0 verdict in the tenant's favor. Someone told me this. The lawyer was describing the theft. The footprints make it seem as though he didn't go to the basement. And the defendant said, "Actually we did." I think it was a Judge Judy clip where the woman is listing a number of items stolen from her by an ex-boyfriend. Jewelry, credit cards, electronics, and a certain amount of money. There wasn't $X cash in there immediately followed by that side judges do when people are that dumb. Done. Not the lawyer, but happened to my father-in-law. He had a lucrative commercial construction business and was ready to retire and sell it. He got a buyer and part of the deal was receiving a portion of the profits for several years. Somehow, the company had no profits, but there was all sorts of evidence of wealth, new cars, etc. The new owners slip up. He kept on the head secretary, who loved my father-in-law. She gave dad the information he needed. At trial, the new owner was on the stand. "Nope, we're really just struggling to break even." Dad attorney asked, "What is this corporation?" Before there was an answer, the buyer's attorney literally jumped up and said, "Your Honor, we would like to discuss a settlement." New buyer started a second company. Dad's company was buying the supplies, and new company was getting paid. It's called cooking the books. I heard this from my lawyer. 8 months into the case, 12 hours into a deposition, the client stood and said, "I'm sick of this. I made it all up. Never posted this before." Ex-wife, ex. Trying to fight ex-husband's new girlfriend, NG. NG is in her car trying to flee while ex is beating on car, blocking escape, and grabbing at door handles to get in, but doors are locked. After ex briefly moved out from the path of the car, NG begins to drive away slowly. Ex, noticing the car starting to leave, dives onto the hood of the car, slides off, gets run over at slow speed, and breaks bones. Several surgeries later, ex sues NG. alleging negligence in hitting X with the car. As I'm deposing X, she claims to have never touched the car before it hit her, never punched or kicked the car, never broke the windshield wipers, never grabbed the door handle to try to open the door, never dove on the hood, just yelling. I asked what NG was doing during this time, and X describes NG as deer in headlights, staring straight ahead, locked in her car, both hands on the steering wheel. How did you know the doors were locked? That one got dismissed pretty quickly. This is one of the best stories on here. It's so subtle but so sweet. Columbo type moment. Ian and have told this story before, but it is a good one. I had a problem with my cell provider and my cell phone wasn't receiving a signal where my cottage is located, even though it was clearly marked as an area that would receive a full signal on their map. I went back to provider and told them of my problem and they gave me a different phone with the same results. I then took back the phone and charger because they were useless to me at the time. This was over 20 years ago. They then sued me. In court I had a picture of the phone screen showing no bars while standing on my dock. Their lawyer argued that the picture could have been taken anywhere. Then the judge piped up, I know where your cottage is. I have a cottage nearby. I switched providers because I could hardly get a signal where I am. There's no way you'll get a signal from X provider. Then the judge ripped into the representative from the cell company and their lawyer. It was a good day. Dang, that cell provider is anal. I sat in on a criminal trial, and the defense basically had no defense other than there were documents lying around with the name Jack Smith and our client's name is John Smith, so there might have been someone else living in the house hiding the drugs. In the very last minute of closing arguments, the prosecutor stood up and said, I'm really tired of you spending all week pretending you don't know who Jack is when you know very well. Your trial binders, which have been sat on your desk all week, say Jack Smith, because that's what he goes by. Husband and wife charged with drug sales. Wife had given a full admission to the cops and ended up pleading before trial. The drugs were found in a shed with tools that the husband admits are his, but he denies knowing anything about the drugs. I go to trial against husband, and during his testimony, he says something about traditional family values. On cross, I start asking about his relationship with his wife. He admits that he's in charge of the finances, admits she has to ask permission to spend money. He ends up saying that she doesn't do anything without his permission. I then ask him if he knows she admitted to selling drugs. He did. So wouldn't she need his permission to do that? Of course she would, he says. No further questions. Jury comes back guilty in less than half an hour. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but my grandparents had the longest running divorce settlement in LA history in the 70s. My grandpa refused to pay his alimony. One year, he went to Hawaii and sent my grandma a postcard that said something along the lines, but more wittingly, I'm enjoying all of your alimony money. Look at what I'm doing with it. She drove it straight to her lawyer, and it was game over for Gramps. I was prosecuting a traffic ticket and ended my opening statement with something similar to, by the end of the day you'll agree that the officer caught the defendant going 65 in a 50. Defendant, representing himself, stands up and says, while he may have clocked me going 65 in a 50, judge stopped the trial, excused the jury, and was like, you just confessed, so are we changing your plea to no contest or what? As an 18-year-old computer store owner, I had a guy sue me because his computer was a lemon. Well, he chose to represent himself, to which the judge said only an idiot would represent himself. Begged the guy to postpone and get a lawyer. Nope. So the guy rambled for 20 minutes and made himself look like a complete redneck moron who just didn't know how to use computer. So then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up and said some legal phrase to the effect of the plaintiff failed to ask for any damages, therefore we ask for summary dismissal. Gravel bang. Granted, Mr. Plaintiff, I told you that you needed an attorney. Dude, when even the judge tells you to get a lawyer, maybe you should get one. I represented an insurance company to recover monies it paid under a homeowner's policy. Google subrogation. It was a multi-million-dollar home with a 450-gallon custom fish tank on the second floor. The owner hired a company to clean the tank, and they brought in a fish specialist to make sure the fish were properly maintained, stored for the cleaning. The specialist then goes to lunch and turns it over to a 22-year-old they had hired a week before who could have doubled for Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The kid just had to drain the tank and start cleaning. Up and until I deposed the kid, the fish tank company claimed they had properly drained the water into the municipal sewer system. It's not the case. The kid, who has been fired long before I deposed him and didn't give two shoots about rolling on his employer, testifies that he sparked a joint right after his boss left and then proceeded to drain the tank. But this was the first time he had done a second story job. The hose they had wouldn't make it to where it needed to go, so he went into the nearest bathroom. Mindful of his customer, he didn't want to dump 450 gallons of dirty fish water into the tub or sink, so he leans the hose over the counter and into the toilet, ends up walking out and leaving it there to grab some munchies. When he got back, there was 449 gallons of dirty fish water all throughout the house. The case settled within 3 days of the deposition. But this was the first time he had done a second story job. All I could think when I read this was the colloquial meaning that he was a thief. Represented an employer in an FMLA retaliation claim. The plaintiff had quit, claiming a hostile work environment, then went on and started her own company that more or less competed with my client. In the plaintiff's deposition, the plaintiff went on and on about how sick she was when she went on FMLA leave, and how horribly she was treated by my client. Her new company had a Facebook page. I asked her about it, and had printed out several sections from the page, including photos. She admitted she had posted the photos, and Marizo posted them from her phone moments after they were taken. After I had those admissions on the record, I produced pictures of her touring the facility where her new business was located, smiling and walking with her friends. The date of those photos was while she was on FMLA leave from my client. My client was being sued in China. We decided to sue them in US to convince the Chinese judge to dismiss the case so it can be heard in the US. We filed suit, and we got the other side to accept service. During the Chinese court hearing, the opposition wanted to have the Chinese court hear the case, but Chinese lawyers got shut down because they signed for the service in the US, implying that the US court is the proper jurisdiction and venue. Told this story a few years back, but everything old is new again. My brother is a divorce attorney. His most memorable case, he was representing a guy in a divorce custody battle who was accused of horrific child abuse. Very graphic, very detailed depositions from the young kids against daddy. Things look grim. Then my brother notices the deposition transcript, done by social workers under oath, contains a question at the end from one of the kids. Did I hit my marks? My brother had previously tried to make it as an actor in Hollywood right out of high school, failing miserably, and decided to go into law. And altogether subpoenas the wife's personal checking account during discovery. Sure enough, acting lessons. Deposes an extremely sketchy acting coach, and panics. Coach quickly coughs up DVDs of practice interrogations with the kids, hours of coaching the kids on exactly what imaginary things to say about daddy. He says it was his one and only Perry Mason moment in 20 plus years of practice, and dad got sole custody of the kids. Holy crap. Fake accusations of serious crimes make my blood boil. The wife could have put her ex in prison for years over something he didn't do. Not my story but a mentor's. He worked in personal injury and accidents. The accident was between two very expensive cars, his clients being new and the opposing sides being a vintage collectible. The case was only in regards to damages and what each side owed each other. The opposing side tried to claim the paint damage on the front where there was a collision, claiming that the cost of the paint job was no longer made and had to be custom made, mixed, and applied especially, and made a big deal over paint. My mentor had the keen eyesight and pointed out if the paint was damaged, where were the paint chips, as they were missing yet not on the ground or embedded in his client's obviously contrasting car. This was brought up in cross, and was met with a dumbfounded look and quiet. This bore a huge hole in the credibility of the opposing counsel and eventually led to the very expensive case going in his favor. I had a middle-aged client who was arrested for a DUI based solely off of the testimony of his stepdad and the neighbors. My client was arrested in his house sleeping on the bed for drunk driving. No police officers saw him driving, no FSTs were conducted, and no back was recorded. The stepdad had a falling out with the guy and was really pushing the DA's office to press charges. Like really pushing it. For whatever reason they took it to trial. Some backstory to this. My client was about 5 feet 5 and close to 350 pounds. I am about as opposite as I can be from him. Completely different color hair, height, build, etc. State calls their first witness and asks them to identify who they saw driving drunk the day my client was arrested. The witness pointed to me. Yes, me. The guy in the suit and definitely not a short fat guy in a tank top and shorts. The re-asked the question and got the same answer. Needless to say, direct didn't last very long. State brought on a second witness, the wife of the first witness. Asked them to identify the person they saw driving intoxicated. Again, the witness points to me. I had to stifle a laugh. It was hilarious. The kind of pushes back asking questions like, are you sure that is who you saw? Have you ever seen them before? And the woman started going on and on and on saying things like, I see him all the time getting the mail. And of course I know it is him because he is so tall I always have to look up to talk to him when I stood up for cross. She spoke to me as if I was the defendant. Even going so far as to say shame on you for driving drunk in our neighborhood, sheesh. State calls the third witness and asks them to identify the defendant. The third, completely unrelated witness identified me again as the defendant. So, at this point, the state had no offered any back, FSTs, no police observations, and only 3 witnesses that had identified the wrong defendant when they had a 50% chance of guessing who was the defendant. So yeah, it was really 3 gotcha moments, but the gotcha-ness of each statement crescendoing to bigger and better gotcha-s. The DA's office where I was at during that trial was very reasonable and fair. I think I just got stuck with a badder. They let her go shortly after that for unrelated things. Well, I hope you got the book thrown at you for drunk driving. Shame on you. Not me but a coworker. So our client was an employee of this trucking company. The contractual agreement stated that the employer had to base the pay of the employee on the data the truck's computer provided, and after the employer could add any corrections he saw fit. The employer provided a statement how the pay was calculated. The employee then had 3 months to object to the calculation. If he didn't, the statement stood and wasn't easily to dispute anymore. So our client claimed his salary was calculated wrongly, yet he couldn't prove he had objected. Our client said he did and the employer said he didn't. Tough freaking luck for our client as it was basically a losing case. So then came the closing statements. The employee has the second to last word and said, although I cannot prove it, know that I am telling the truth and I did object. Then it was the employer's turn to speak. To the surprise of all present he said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm so sick and tired of seeing this employee and his constant and incessant whining about his payslip. Our client won. I was a witness at a hearing on some counterfeit aircraft parts. The lawyer for the German company that supplied them told us that there was a delay and that the hearing had to be rescheduled. The magistrate in charge said number, now, not later. Turns out that the German guy who said he was the owner of said company was bogus and he was Canadian and that the real owner of the company had died at a hospital in London 2 days earlier. Oops, they caught dude trying to get into Canada about a week later. Former insurance lawyer. There were quite a few times I've busted someone for faking a disability by hiring private investigators to tail them for a day. One guy claimed he could barely walk or move at all. Like couldn't even make himself breakfast or get out of bed without help. Caught him literally jogging out of his independent medical examination for the purpose of litigation and threw his walker aside when he bent down to pick up his keys after dropping them. I work fraud investigations now and it never ceases to amaze me how people think they're exceptional liars. Not my story but a friend's parent, FP, told me this one. FP works as a lawyer for an insurance company. A man got a coverage claim for his new Bugatti that would compensate him $2.20 million more than the car was worth in the case of an accident. This man was driving his Bugatti near a lake somewhere, Texas I think, when all of a sudden, his car took a turn into it. Before this happened, however, teenagers were filming this very expensive car, as it was interesting. They filmed everything that happened. When the man got back home, he said that a bird had flew in his windshield. The insurance company had no evidence to prove him wrong and they were frantically trying to figure something out. That's when the teenagers offered the video, as the story had made the news. The video had shown that no bird had flew in front of him, and the case was resolved. The guy got charged with insurance fraud. TLDR. Some guy committed insurance fraud while kids were filming. One of my close friends in law school went on to work at a small but very prestigious litigation firm. The kind where everyone works 80+ hours a week, drives expensive cars and wears suits. On the other hand, I practiced estate planning and I tended to wear jeans and I drove the car I had in college. I had closed down my solo practice since I was moving for my husband's job and my friend hired me on part-time to help train new law clerks on how to use legal software. It was a mix of glorified IT work combined with babysitting law students. I mostly took the job as a favor to her since she was juggling multiple cases at the moment and it gave me something to do for the 2 months until the move. To say the least, I was not going to run out and buy a bunch of suits for the position, so I continued my jeans look. About 3 weeks and I am in the elevator and I am joined by 2 men. One clearly is a lawyer while the other is his client. The client asks the lawyer, "Do we need to tell them about the deleted emails in the backup server?" Lawyer responds with, "No, whatever you do, don't mention it. Lie if you have to, but don't mention it at all." We all get off on the same floor and they walk into one of the meeting rooms. I go into my friend's office and tell her to ask them about the deleted emails and the backup server. Apparently the deposition was epic. The client cracked like an egg the second it was asked and spilled everything. Not me, but my husband, who is an attorney. He was on a work comp case, and the defendant claimed he had a work injury that made him unable to walk, lift over 1 pound, basically do any functions of daily life, asking for a lot of $sign of my husband's client. My husband's paralegal did a bit of investigating and found photos of him dated 1 week before the deposition, sledding in the snow, walking up hills, throwing snowballs, etc. My husband went through all of the basic depo questions, asking about how debilitated this person was, including a sprinkling of questions asking if he could no longer transit without a wheelchair, throw anything, certainly couldn't walk up a hill, to which the client said, under oath, that would be impossible. Then, he revealed the photos, made publicly on Facebook for anyone to see. He asked if that was him, if it was the correct date, etc. The opposing attorney apparently looked appalled, spoke with his client in private for a moment, and they withdrew. Probably getting buried, but when I was just starting out I sat in on a workers' comp deposition to get a feel for it. There was a woman who claimed she lost use of her shoulder after slipping and falling at work. The attorney asks her very general questions about her range of motion and weight carrying ability. Think like, can you lift your arm above your head? Can you lift 5 pounds above your shoulder? She swore she had very limited range of motion, 30 degrees less than shoulder height, and could lift absolutely no weight on her right side. The lawyer's questions got more specific. Can you throw a trash bag into a bin? No, she says. Can you lift a lamp over your head? She looks at her attorney like she's trying to figure out what's going on. Can you wash a 1999 Toyota 4Runner while standing on the running board? She starts yelling at her attorney in her native language. Turns out, we had a PI observe her Sunday chores from a public park across the street. She took out the trash, picked up a lamp someone else had thrown away, then washed her car. Case settled for $200 at the deposition. Not a lawyer, but involved in fraud investigations. Called a suspect who was allegedly using the money he was being provided as guardian for an incapable individual. I explained the allegation. He stated, "Yeah, they are correct. I took the lump sum and bought C and booze. I understand it was wrong. Do what you gotta, so I'll sign a statement or come in the office if you need me to." Not really dealing with higher level criminals here. People are people. They weren't trying to fill a bad guy role. It's got to be a terrible life, hating yourself inside, or they just really hoped they wouldn't be caught, and had already known that all they'd be able to do if they were was to shrug. Work in family law. client insisted the employee his wife claimed was their family assistant was his wife's personal assistant. He had nothing to do with her, and all of her payroll should be allocated to his wife. Opposing attorneys show up with an email from client to family assistant saying in future dinners, when broccoli is served, I require a higher flow rate to stem ratio. Payroll got allocated to the community and we consistently joke about florets. This was before I went to law school, but while I was working for a defense attorney. It's a longish story. His client owned a very spacious auto shop. He would offer homeless men menial jobs and actually let them stay at the shop overnight. There was a loft area with bedding and everything, so it was kind of a nice deal for them. To make some money, he stocks the fridge with some food for them and everything. Gives them a roof over their heads and a bed to sleep on. Turns out he was also kind of forcing them to have sex with him and with each other. Prosecutors charge the guy with felony pandering, which means pimping, to force, induce, entice or inveigle a person to become a prostitute. There were close to a dozen men that came forward and said they'd gone through this with the defendant over the course of about a year. Defense attorney spends a lot of time reviewing the pandering statute and notices that the statute was amended not long ago in a material way. He keeps it to himself. They go to the prelim. Defense counsel is crossing the victims, focusing very much on the timeline. When was the first time this happened to you? When was the last? He's marking the dates on a whiteboard. After everyone has spoken, he gets up with his whiteboard and draws a long, dividing line after all of those dates. This line, he says, represents when the pandering statute was changed from A to B. New whiteboard. A person who does any of the following is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 20 years. B. Induces, persuades, encourages, inveigles, or entices a female to become a prostitute. B. A person who does any of the following is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 20 years. B. Induces, persuades, encourages, inveigles, or entices a person to become a prostitute. There were 0 female victims. At the time the alleged crime was committed, it was not illegal to induce, persuade, encourage, inveigle or entice a male to become a prostitute. They failed to bind him over on the pandering charges. They recharged him with something else and I think he ended up going in for 10 on that. What a scumbag. I hope it's okay to do this on by proxy. Uncle is a lawyer and this is one of his favorite ones, though I know I can't do it justice. Defendant was pulled over, small town in the south, accused of DUI, and came to my uncle because afterwards evidence surfaced of there being open containers. He of course maintained his innocence. Well, it was later found out this evidence was Budweiser containers, cans or bottles, I can't recall. Thing is, this was not long after Budweiser had started their Born on Date campaign, and the evidence was born after the date the defendant was pulled over. Suffice to say the case fell apart after that. Not me, but my cousin. He's an intellectual property lawyer who lives in the Bay Area and represents lots of small artists and craftspeople. One day, one of his clients is wandering through the aisles of a major home decor chain store. She notices a bowl that looks exactly like one of her bowls. Ultimately, she and my cousin sue the chain store. The store denies everything. My cousin buys a bunch of the suspect bowls and has them sent to a lab where they do a series of scans. What they discovered guaranteed victory for my cousin's client. The company had stolen her design. The proof was that when they copied the original bowl, when they made the mold, they accidentally included her fingerprint, which meant that every bowl that they sold literally had her fingerprints all over them. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.